I gave 15 years of my life to that company, late nights, missed birthdays, weekend calls I never ignored. So when my manager called me in and said the merger meant I was being let go, I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. I came home that evening, shaken, scared, unsure of what to do next. I sat across from my wife, Vanessa, and said quietly, I lost my job today. She didn't flinch, didn't reach for my hand. She laughed, not a nervous laugh, not disbelief, no. It was cruel measured. Then she said, maybe now you'll understand what real work looks like. Sitting in meetings isn't hard labor. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about my marriage shattered. I'd been loyal, faithful, I thought we were a team, but it turns out she'd been waiting for me to fail. And I had no idea how deep that betrayal would go. What she didn't know was that I'd already started recording everything she said. If you've ever been kicked while you were down, this story is for you. Let me know in the comments if you've ever trusted the wrong person. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge with Chris for stories that hit deep every single day. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm 45 years old, born and raised in Chicago. And until a few months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I wasn't flashy, I didn't drive a luxury car or flaunt my salary, but I worked hard, I showed up. For my job, for my wife, for the life we were supposed to be building together, I started in marketing right out of college and worked my way up 15 years at the same firm. Loyalty used to mean something. You know, I wasn't chasing titles, I just wanted to provide a stable life. And for the longest time, I thought I was doing exactly that. Vanessa and I met in our 20s. She was ambitious, sharp, beautiful, in that effortless way that made people stop and look twice. We dated for a year and got married after 2. I loved her. God, I really did. She had this way of making a room feel electric. People gravitated to her, and when she smiled at me, it felt like I was chosen. Our marriage wasn't perfect, whose is, but we had our routines. I handled most of the bills and cooked on weekends. She managed the social calendar and liked to host dinner parties. We didn't fight often, at least not until recently. Looking back, I think the signs were there. Little comments, eye rolls. She'd call my job pushing papers, say I was lucky to sit at a desk instead of real work, like teachers or nurses. I'd laugh it off. I told myself she was just teasing. But after I got laid off, everything changed. It happened on a Tuesday. The company had been acquired in a merger, and my department was restructured. I got a severance package and some boilerplate line about nothing personal. I remember walking to the parking lot in a daze. My key card already didn't work 15 years, and I was out the door in under 15 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove home rehearsing how I'd break the news to Vanessa. She was in the kitchen when I got back, scrolling on her phone, sipping wine. I stood there, heart pounding. And when I finally said it, I lost my job today. She looked up, paused for a second, and laughed, not a comforting chuckle, not nervous, a full-on laugh. Like I just told the punchline of a joke. Then she said, maybe now you'll understand what real work feels like. You've had it easy your whole life. I couldn't speak. I just stood there stunned. The woman I thought would comfort me, lift me up when I fell, was mocking me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside her, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how I got it so wrong. Had she always seen me this way? Had I just missed it? The next morning she was back to normal, smiling, asking if I wanted coffee, like nothing had happened. But the way I looked at her had changed, and I think she knew it. From that day forward, she became colder, passive-aggressive jabs, sarcastic remarks about my job hunt. She'd come home late from the gym, barely speaking to me. And every time I tried to talk to her, really talk, she shut me down. You're too sensitive. Maybe if you worked harder, you wouldn't be in this mess. I felt like I was living with a stranger. Or maybe I was finally seeing the version of her that had been there all along. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet, I told myself. Marriage had its seasons. That stress made people act out. That maybe once I got a new job, things would go back to normal. But in the back of my mind, a quiet voice whispered, she's not coming back from this. And deep down, I knew it was right. In the weeks that followed, things didn't get better, they got worse. Vanessa wasn't just distant anymore. She was hostile. Every meal felt like a Cold War. Every conversation turned into a power play. I'd sit at the kitchen table laptop, open trying to polish my resume or apply for positions, and she'd walk by and mutter things like, "Still playing pretend, huh?" Or "How many companies rejected you today?" She said it with a smirk like she got a kick out of watching me squirm. I tried to laugh it off at first, tried to remind myself she was probably stressed too, but the digs kept coming. She'd make comments when we were out in public. At dinner with friends, she joked Eric's exploring his new identity as a stay-at-home husband. Maybe I'll get him an apron for Christmas. They laughed nervously. I forced a smile. But something had shifted. This wasn't frustration or disappointment. This was contempt. One night I overheard her on the phone in the other room. She was talking to someone, her voice low but sharp. "No, I haven't told him yet, but I'm getting close. He's just so pathetic lately, I didn't catch the rest." But I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning I called a friend of mine, Jonas. We used to work together years ago, and he'd gone through a messy divorce not long ago. When I told him what was happening, there was a pause. Then he said, "Eric, start recording." Just in case I hesitated, I'm not the sneaky type. But Illinois is a one-party consent state. Legally, I didn't need her permission. And morally, well, I was starting to see a side of Vanessa I didn't recognize. Or maybe I finally was, so I did it. I downloaded an app that ran silently in the background and started logging our conversations. Not all of them, just the moments that felt off. It didn't take long. One recording caught her saying, "You've always been a disappointment. I just never said it out loud before." Another had her telling me I was probably fired because I was lazy and overrated. She laughed when I told her I was networking, mocked me for ironing a shirt before a Zoom interview. No one wants a washed-up 40-something who's clinging to his glory days. She said I started listening back at night after she went to sleep. And the more I listened, the more something inside me hardened. It wasn't just anger, it was grief. Grief for a marriage I realized I had probably been carrying on my own for a long time. And then came the real blow. She came home late from the gym one evening again. I had a recording running on the living room speaker. I'd forgotten to turn it off, but lucky for me, she didn't notice. She took a phone call. And this one changed everything. I heard her say, "I can't keep pretending he's so weak now. It's like he's not even a man anymore." There was a pause. Then she said, "No, he doesn't suspect a thing. He still thinks I'm just going to the gym, but you and I both know that's not what's happening." I felt the blood drain from my face. She was talking to someone, a man I didn't catch a name. But she said something else quietly but clearly. "This whole job loss thing, it's perfect. Now I can leave him and say I tried, but he couldn't bounce back. I'll look like the strong one." That was the moment. That was when everything inside me finally broke. Not from sadness, but from clarity. She wasn't just unhappy. She wasn't just angry. She was planning to use my lowest moment as her exit strategy. And what she didn't know was that I was finally done being the man who begged for her attention. After that night, I stopped looking at Vanessa the same way. There was no going back, not after hearing her voice dripping with disdain as she talked about me like I was a burden. A failure, a stepping stone on her way out, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. There was something about the coldness in her voice that haunted me. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was how calculated she sounded, like she'd been planning this for longer than I could imagine. I needed to know more. So I started digging. We had a shared bank account where most of our expenses were paid. But I remembered once years ago, Vanessa mentioning she had her own side savings for emergencies. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now I wondered what kind of emergencies she'd been preparing for. So I went looking. It didn't take long. Turns out she'd been funneling money out of our joint account for months. Small withdrawals, transfer descriptions labeled as miscellaneous or grocery cash. But they all ended up in an online savings account under her name. One I hadn't known existed, tens of thousands of dollars. Gone, I felt sick. I thought of all the times I'd skip things. New shoes nights out, just to be responsible. And meanwhile, she was preparing for her exit, while still letting me pay the bills I kept recording. Kept documenting. She never noticed how quiet I'd become, never asked why I stopped trying to talk. She assumed I was broken, but I was watching. listening, waiting. Then 3 days later, I caught her on another phone call. Same man, same hushed tone. "Don't worry," she whispered. "He still has no clue. And once the papers are filed, it's over. He'll have to leave the house. He won't be able to afford a lawyer, let alone fight me for anything." That was it. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just cruel, she was strategic, and I needed to be too. I scanned all the audio files and backed them up twice. I pulled every bank statement I could get my hands on. I even called my old coworker from the company that had offered me a new position, asked him to overnight the signed contract so I had it in hand. And I booked an appointment with a divorce attorney. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about protecting myself. The attorney, Miss Fraser, was sharp, experienced, calm. She listened to everything, eyes narrowing as I played the recordings and showed her the money trail. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "You're in a far better position than she thinks you are, but timing is everything. Don't tip your hand too early." So I didn't. I came home that night like nothing had changed. I made dinner, washed the dishes, sat through another one of Vanessa's rants about how real men provide. I nodded, smiled even. But inside, I wasn't breaking anymore. I was preparing. There's a strange kind of calm that comes when you realize the worst is already happening. When there's no more pretending, no more hoping, just clarity. I stopped defending myself, stopped trying to fix what was already dead. And in that silence, I found power. Vanessa mistook it for weakness. She thought I was shutting down, that I was surrendering. But I wasn't. I was documenting. I was planning. I was becoming the man she never thought I'd be, the man who didn't need her validation to rise. And the next time she walked through that door, flashing the divorce papers with that smug look on her face, she had no idea that she was about to step into the trap she built for me. Only now she was the one being caught. The envelope was thick, too thick to be anything casual. I found it on the kitchen counter when I came home from a morning walk. Divorce papers neatly stacked and stamped like a final invoice after years of service. I stood there just staring at it. Vanessa walked in a second later, holding a mug of coffee, smirking like she was doing me a favor. "I think it's time we stop pretending, Eric," she said. "Let's just do this like adults, that word again. The same word she used when she laughed in my face after I lost my job. The same word she used when talking to her affair partner over the phone. Let's be adults about this clean break." I didn't say anything, just nodded, picked up the envelope, and calmly walked to my office. Closed the door behind me and smiled. Because I had been waiting for this. My lawyer, Miss Fraser, had already reviewed every possible scenario. She told me what to expect. Vanessa would try to paint herself as the supportive wife pushed too far. She'd probably claim emotional neglect, maybe even abuse. And she'd almost certainly go for spousal support. But what she didn't know was that I was ready. I had receipts, I had recordings, I had a job offer signed and sealed from a rival company with a better salary and full benefits. She thought I was still unemployed, still vulnerable, still the man she mocked in the kitchen 3 weeks ago. But she didn't know I'd spent those same 3 weeks collecting every last piece of proof I'd need to destroy her legal leverage. At mediation, she walked in wearing a confident smile. Her lawyer looked smug, like this was going to be an easy win. They presented their demands like it was a business deal. Vanessa would retain the house. She'd get monthly spousal support. A clean division of remaining assets leaning in her favor due to my lack of income. I let them talk. Then Ms. Fraser opened her briefcase. First, the bank statements clearly showing Vanessa transferring over $40,000 from our joint account into her personal savings without disclosure. Financial misconduct. Next, the audio recordings clipped and transcribed, highlighting her verbal degradation admissions of an ongoing affair and calculated planning to leave him when he's down so he can't fight back. Marital misconduct. Intentional infliction of emotional harm. Lastly, my employment contract with a higher salary than my last role. Proof that I was not some helpless out-of-work husband, but a capable professional who had been playing it cool while building his next move. Vanessa's face dropped. Her lawyer asked for a recess almost immediately. They needed time to reassess. When they came back, the energy had shifted entirely. Now they were the ones asking for a more amicable settlement. Gone were the demands. Gone was the smugness. They offered to drop claims for spousal support and agreed to a more equitable division of assets, one that respected my new job and preserved my share of retirement funds. And the house I didn't want it. Too many ghosts let her keep the shell. I wanted my freedom, but I made one thing clear before we signed. If she ever tried to smear me in public or among our friends, if she tried to frame the story in her favor, I'd release the tapes. Not to the media, not online, just one-on-one. I'd let anyone who asked hear the truth with their own ears. That alone was enough. I never had to share them. Just the knowledge that I could was enough to keep her quiet. After we signed the papers and walked out of that cold mediation room, Vanessa didn't say a word. She didn't look back. Didn't congratulate herself, didn't offer a fake hug. Like so many divorcing spouses do, she just walked to her car and drove off. And I stood there on the sidewalk for a minute, breathing in for the first time in what felt like years. I wasn't just free, I was whole, because I hadn't lowered myself to her level. I hadn't screamed or begged or played the victim. I'd documented, I'd prepared. And when the time came, I executed. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday, quietly, cleanly. No courtroom spectacle, no final arguments, just signatures and silence. But Vanessa wasn't done. Not in the way I hoped. A week after the paperwork cleared, I started getting strange texts from mutual friends, from former colleagues, from people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey man, are you okay? Just checking in. I heard some things." It didn't take long to figure out what was happening. Vanessa had begun whispering her version of the story, painting herself as the devoted wife who stayed by my side during my mental breakdown, claiming I became distant, cold, even emotionally abusive. She didn't name me outright, but the details were clear enough, and the people close to us, some of them started pulling away. At first I was furious. I wanted to blast the truth, post the recordings, name her, burn it all down. But then I remembered what Ms. Fraser told me. The most powerful proof isn't shouted, it's offered quietly with confidence. So that's what I did. When a friend reached out asking what really happened, I didn't defend myself. I didn't beg to be believed. I simply said, if you ever want to hear it for yourself, I have the recordings. No pressure, most of them never followed up, but something strange happened. They stopped asking, and more importantly, they stopped believing her. The doubt was enough. Turns out when someone lies loudly, but the other person stays calm, it makes people wonder, who's really telling the truth? Vanessa's story started to fall apart. People who once nodded along with her began to pull back. She stopped getting invited to events, stopped posting about her new freedom and healing journey. The man she left me for gone. Before the ink on our divorce dried, I heard from a friend at her gym that he moved out without a word. Apparently, he wasn't ready for commitment. Karma doesn't always arrive with a parade. Sometimes it slips in through the back door and rearranges everything while no one's looking. As for me, I started my new job 2 weeks after the divorce. Different company, different culture, one that valued integrity, not just numbers. My coworkers had no idea what I'd just come out of, and I didn't tell them because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying someone else's weight. I went home to a quiet apartment every night. No snide remarks, no cold shoulders, just peace. And that peace was loud enough to fill the silence. Months passed, seasons changed. And one day while grabbing lunch at the cafe near my office, I ran into someone I hadn't expected, Rachel. She used to work in accounting at my old firm. We hadn't spoken since the layoff, but she smiled when she saw me, genuine, warm. We caught up over coffee, then dinner. Then more. Rachel never asked me for the gory details, but one night when I opened up just a little, she said something I'll never forget. The way you talk about it, you didn't just survive it. You learned from it, and she was right, because I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry anymore. Vanessa took a lot from me. Time, trust, the version of myself that believed love meant tolerating cruelty. But what she gave me without meaning to was something far more valuable. A second chance to rebuild, to breathe, to love again. Not out of need, but from choice. She laughed when I lost my job. She thought it was the beginning of the end. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the best thing that could have ever happened for you. Losing my job felt like the end. It wasn't just about the paycheck. It was my identity, my worth, my routine, my place in the world. But in truth, that moment didn't break me. It exposed what was already broken. I used to think love was about sacrifice, about staying loyal no matter what, about holding on even when the other person lets go. But love, real love, isn't built on endurance alone. It's built on respect. And once that's gone, no amount of history can hold it together. Vanessa taught me that. She showed me what it looks like when someone you trust most turns your pain into their opportunity, uses your weakest moment as leverage. But in doing so, she gave me something I didn't know I needed, a clear view of who I was without her, and I liked what I saw. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was still standing, still honest, still me. Today I live quieter. More intentionally, I know now that not everyone who smiles at you has love in their heart, and not everyone who leaves you is a loss. I don't share this story for pity. I share it because someone out there might need to hear this. You don't have to fall apart just because someone else stopped believing in you. What did you think of this story? If you were in my shoes, how would you have handled it? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that like button, subscribe to Revenge with Chris, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder. Karma always keeps the receipts.